Hi, my name is Jacqueline Roberts, and this is my case study for the Missing Booster Club funds for EDL 854. So first of all, what do we know about this case study? Daniel Stevens is the current principal of George Washington Middle School. He has been the principal for 4 years, and he is well liked by the staff, students, and parents. It is a fairly small middle school, about 450 students, that relies heavily on parent volunteers. Their community has been changing over the past several years as a lot of families have moved away to the adjacent city, and so while socioeconomic status has gone down, the parent volunteers have remained strong. Mrs. Bowman is a regular parent volunteer. She has 3 students that are in the current school district. And Mrs. Bowman requests that the PTA pay for her daughter's trip to the All-State Cheerleading Parade in New York, and she has laid out a budget for $798, including flight, hotel, and meals for 3 days. However, Mr. Stevens, the principal, denies her request because he says that PTA funds are meant for all or a majority of the students and not just for one. Soon after, Mrs. Bowman is one of the 4 parent volunteers at a basketball game. These 4 parent volunteers were collecting gate proceeds and concessions. At the game, Mr. Dumas, who's just another spectator at the game, runs into Mr. Stevens and mentions that he used his $50 bill to pay for his tickets tonight. Mrs. Bowman, at the end of the game, hands Mr. Stevens the bank bag, but when Mr. Stevens reconciles the bank bag, 10 tickets and $50, the $50 bill has gone missing. So what do we need to know? I feel like there is a lot that we need to know. First, what happened to the 10 torn tickets? Where did they go and what procedures were or should be in place around that? We need to determine who the second volunteer was collecting gate proceeds. We need to determine what this person knows and see if he or she can account for what happened to the 10 tickets and the $50 bill. Lastly, I just thought it was interesting that Mr. Dumas said, I had to use a $50 bill to pay my way to the game tonight. And I thought his wording was interesting, and I thought maybe perhaps he had, these days paid for an Uber to get to the game and used his $50 bill or something. So I didn't know if if Mr. Stevens should confirm with Mr. Dumas that he meant that he used a $50 bill at the gate to buy tickets. Again, probably he did, but I just would like to confirm. And then also see if Mr. Dumas still has his ticket stub. To identify the problem, it really comes down to that a $50 bill was supposed to be in the money bag, and 10 tickets seem to have gone missing from the currency bank bag. So, as Mr. Stevens, I think this is the following plan of action he should take. First, contact Mr. Dumas. Does he still have the ticket he was given at the game? If so, does the ticket number match up with one of the missing ticket numbers? 2, make sure to talk with Mrs. Bowman about what happened to the 10 torn tickets. 3, talk with other parent volunteers who were collecting gate proceeds, and as well as the concession bank bag. I would reconcile the concessions bank bag because perhaps the volunteers could have given one another change and traded smaller bills for the $50 bill. So talk with additional volunteers. And then, depending on what Mr. Stevens finds, different plans, different actions will need to be taken that I will discuss later. So while Mr. Stevens is implementing this plan, it's really important to keep in mind that when talking to all people involved, it's important to state the facts and ask questions without accusation. Next, we need to check all receipts and tickets. And if Mrs. Bowman or one of the other volunteers is found to be guilty of theft, follow district protocol on handling the situation. So should law enforcement get involved? Should community service or payment be made? Should Mrs. Bowman no longer be able to handle money as a volunteer? And definitely want to review money handling procedures with volunteers. One of the volunteers should have counted the money in front of Mr. Stevens at the end of the game before the deposit. So, of course, we want to think about what is best for all students. The money raised at these events goes back to students, and it's critical that all money is accounted for. We do, however, want to assume positive intentions first. We want to make sure that, parent volunteers are doing just that normally. They are volunteering and they are doing it for their students and for the community. So make sure to assume positive intentions first. And really, what's best for all students is that volunteers continue to stay active in the school. It's proven to be successful for many years, and we know that volunteers and an active parent community is really important for student success. So the resolution. If money was not taken and the 10 reported torn tickets were in fact just torn, Mr. Stevens would need to create guidelines around discarded or torn tickets to make sure that this confusion doesn't happen in the future. If, however, Mrs. Bowman did take the $50, I would make sure to get guidance from the superintendent or financial office as to first steps. And again, do we need to get law enforcement involved? Is there going to be community service? I think she would definitely need to repay the money taken. And what would be her future position as a volunteer? Would she be able to volunteer? Would she be able to handle money? And then thirdly, another possibility, did another person or volunteer take the $50? And we would handle it the same way as Mrs. Bowman. So during this case study, one thing I really thought about is that Mrs. Bowman didn't seem to be upset, or we didn't know she was upset when Mr. Stevens denied her request to pay for her daughter's expenses. So while it does seem logical that she would be the first person to have stolen the money, there really is not enough proof yet. And I really just kept coming back to the fact that I value the parent volunteers. And parent volunteers, it seems that this community are a big reason for school and athletic success, so I would want to make sure to value them first before making any accusations. So what is unresolved? Well, it's still unknown as to who took the money, and less likely but possible, was the money even stolen? So without really being able to know exactly, really this whole case is still unresolved. So in order to promote effective and efficient management of the school or district policies, we want to make sure to review money handling procedures with volunteers before another event. This includes requiring volunteers to submit a reconciliation form at the end of an event that includes the ticket numbers and sales that match the money collected. It's really important to have that accountability piece for both sides so that money is there and volunteers feel supported and can back up what they say as well. And then either Mr. Stevens or another appointed person should count the money and review the reconciliation form before a deposit is made for each event. And again, make sure to express gratitude for parent volunteers. So we want to definitely promote the social learning of every student. And so as a principal, Mr. Stevens is, of course, a model for his students. How he handles this situation will be important. Does he treat everyone with respect? Does he give appropriate consequences for those guilty? And of course, does he inform the community in an appropriate way? It's important to acknowledge if a mistake was made and notify the community and notify the actions that have been taken to rectify the situation. And so, what does the community need to know? What do they not need to know? But keeping the community informed, I think, is important. And of course, we want to promote student academic learning at all times. So funds are used for student academics and athletics. So it's critical that money is accounted for and used in the appropriate way. Um, all this fundraising and money and proceeds from these events are critical to students' success. We want to maintain and promote policies that allow for the school to continue building its academic and athletic programs with funding. So we don't want to diminish or disencourage people from, going to these events or volunteering at these events. And then we want to encourage and maybe search for other ways to fundraise so that Mrs. Bowman can send her daughter to the All-State Cheerleading Parade. So we want to support her still and support her daughter, but just not with PTA funds. All right, that's it. Thank you.